Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Hope you guys are all doing super well. So welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Dorothea Puente. This is a truly crazy one. This case took place in Sacramento, California, and I had no idea that any of this had happened, that this woman even existed, like nothing. You know, not only is this case very horrifying and tragic, and it's just also very sad and devastating and just very unfair. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Before we get into the video, I quickly want to thank today's sponsor, Cerebral. Thank you to Cerebral for sponsoring today's video. Cerebral is an online health service that provides you access to medication management, counseling, and therapy. They also provide help for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and other conditions, and treatment for ADHD, bipolar, and PTSD are available in certain states. They allow you to get the mental health care you deserve from the privacy of your own home. I think the online convenience is a great benefit of Cerebral because this way you don't have to work around your schedule to figure out a time where you can make it into the office and sit down and talk to your counselor in person. Now you can just stay home and schedule your visits with your counselor or your therapist whenever it's most convenient for you. With the mobile app, you can message your care provider at any time. So if you ever have any questions, comments, or concerns about what's going on, you can just send them a quick message, and it's basically like having your care team in your pocket at all times. Your care team at Cerebral works together to create the best treatment plan for you. So if you've gone through something major in your life or are going through a stressful time, Cerebral's therapists are there for you. They truly believe that everyone deserves to get the high-quality mental health care that they deserve. So you can start Cerebral with or without insurance, but they are in network with most insurers. Therapy with Cerebral can cost 3 times less than with traditional therapy services. Mental health is so important, and I know I've had my struggles with it in the past, but anytime I reached out and got the help that I needed, I felt so much better and was able to overcome my issues and just be in a better place. Getting started with Cerebral is a quick and easy process. All you have to do to get started is fill out a short online form and answer a few questions to help Cerebral understand your symptoms. From there, you can choose to subscribe to one of the 3 different membership options based on your needs and budget. If you want to take the next step on working on your mental health, you guys can click the link in the description box down below to begin your questionnaire and get connected to a provider right away. Your first month starts at only $30. Thank you again to Cerebral for sponsoring today's video. Alright you guys, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you guys again so much for being here and watching today's video. It truly means the world to me, and I just really love and appreciate all the support that you guys give me. Alright, enough chit chatter, let's jump right into today's video. So Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 19th, 1929 in San Bernardino, California. She was the 6th of 7 children, and her parents were said to be alcoholics and emotionally and physically abusive. When she was 8 years old, her father passed away from tuberculosis, and then just a year later, her mother passed away in a motorcycle accident. So now Dorothea and her 6 other siblings were orphans. They eventually got separated, and Dorothea went to go live at an orphanage for some time. There are some reports saying that Dorothea was sexually abused while staying at this orphanage. After spending some time at the orphanage, she was sent to go live with some of her relatives in Fresno, California. As she was getting older, she began to kind of distort her life story and would tell some pretty odd lies. For example, she would tell people that she had 17 siblings, which of course is not true. She only had 6 other siblings. She also told people that she was born and raised in Mexico and that a random family had found her and raised her as their own, which again we know is not true, but she would kind of just like tell people these random lies. Like it would just be like the most ridiculous, outrageous thing. But I've seen some people say that it could have just been a defense mechanism she had because of her past trauma. You know, since she did have a pretty rough childhood, maybe this was her way of changing the narrative and making her life seem more interesting and I guess happier than it really was. When Dorothea was 16 years old, she decided to leave her home in California and she moved to Olympia, Washington. There, she would financially support herself by becoming a sex worker. While she was working, she ended up meeting 22-year-old Fred McFall. He was a soldier that had been serving in World War II. He started out as Dorothea's client, but their professional relationship would soon turn romantic. In 1945, Dorothea and Fred decided to make things official and they decided to get married. Then they moved to Nevada to start their new life as a married couple. However, things between the couple were not good. At first, they really loved each other and were excited to start their new life as a married couple and, begin this new chapter together. But Fred began to realize that Dorothea was not as mature as he had thought. Now, this is because when they first met, Dorothea told Fred that she was 30 years old and that her name was Cheryl. He thought he was marrying this 30-year-old woman, and as the relationship developed, he realized that she would have all these random lies and she would tell people that she was an actress in movies, that she had a lot of famous friends. At one point, she was even telling people that she was related to the ambassador of Sweden. Like, she would just make up these really crazy lies, and Fred started to realize, okay, something is not right with this girl, and quickly their relationship began to dissolve. However, the couple actually had 2 kids together, and they ended up giving one up for adoption, and the other child was sent to go live with some of their family members. After this, Dorothea and Fred officially got divorced in 1948, just 3 years after their marriage. Once her relationship with Fred was over, Dorothea moved to Los Angeles, California, and when she got there, she told people that her husband had died from a heart attack and that she was here in Los Angeles trying to, get a fresh start and recover from the death of her husband, which was not true. Fred was still alive, but again, Dorothea wanted to get attention. She wanted to make her life seem more interesting. So after her move to Los Angeles, Dorothea was trying to figure out how she was going to be financially stable and, what she was going to do for work. This is when she decided to start stealing and forging checks. She actually ended up getting caught for this and was sentenced to 1 year in jail on forgery charges, but she only ended up serving 4 months and then she was granted parole. When she was released on parole, she ended up getting pregnant again, but this time it was with a man that she barely knew. Then when her daughter was born, she gave her up for adoption and then moved to San Francisco, California. In 1952, Dorothea married a Swedish man named Axel Johansson. Their newlywed bliss quickly wore off when Axel realized that Dorothea was lying about pretty much everything, including about her childhood and her involvement in sex work. When Axel would go out of town for work, Dorothea would go out to some bars, have a few drinks, meet some men, and then invite them back to her house. Her neighbors say that they constantly saw men arriving in taxis and coming in and out of the house. When Axel found out about this, he was obviously upset because his wife was inviting men to come stay in his home, and he was really angry with her. And Dorothea says that after this moment, Axel began to be physically and mentally abusive towards her. Their relationship was not healthy. They were always fighting. It was very toxic, and they would always break up and then get back together, break up and then get back together. So it just was a very toxic relationship. While dealing with this relationship, Dorothea was trying to figure out ways she could continue to make money. So this is when she decided to claim she was a holistic doctor and began to treat people around the neighborhood. She would tell people that she learned her trade while growing up in Mexico and that she would go from village to village in Mexico, treating people and curing them. Which I know I don't have to tell you this, but that was not true. That was just a crazy lie that she was making up so that she could get people's money and tell them, oh yeah, I'm gonna cure you, I'm gonna make you feel better. But she would take their money and not actually help them. A lot of people have said that when they first met Dorothea, she was just a very caring and kind person, and she was very well spoken, so anything that came out of her mouth, you would most likely believe her. While Dorothea was great at manipulating other people and making them believe she was this holistic doctor, her husband Axel was quickly catching on to her her lies and her manipulation, and he knew something was wrong with her. He became so concerned with her erratic behavior that in 1961, he had Dorothea committed to a mental hospital. The doctors quickly put her on antipsychosis and reported that she was a pathological liar with an unstable personality. She was also put on a very heavy psych medication while in treatment. She eventually was released from this mental hospital, and in 1966, Dorothea and Axel officially got divorced. Some years go by since the divorce, and Dorothea ends up doing a lot. She gets married once again to a man named Roberto Puente, who was only 20 years old and could have passed as Dorothea's son. But that relationship didn't really last that long. Some people claim that Roberto was just using Dorothea to gain citizenship and gain her money. So a year into their marriage, they ended up getting divorced. From that moment, Dorothea decided she wanted to start her own Alcoholic Anonymous meetings, and she began to run a boarding house where she could rehabilitate people. She moved into a 16-bedroom home and began filling the rooms, charging her tenants for room and board. At the same time, she was also very active in the community, and a lot of people saw her as this caring and kind person that just wanted to help people and offer them a place to stay until they could get better. And Dorothea absolutely loved all of the attention, money, and power she was gaining from this boarding house. Eventually, she married a fourth time to a man named Pedro Angel Montalvo, but their marriage only lasted a week because Pedro left Dorothea unexpectedly and never returned. After this divorce, Dorothea began to go out to some local bars to meet some older men who were on pensions, who were receiving benefits, and then she would forge their signatures and steal their money. She was eventually caught for doing this and was charged with 34 counts of treasury fraud and was given 5 years probation. After this altercation with the law, Dorothea began to reinvent herself once again, and this time she started telling people she was 10 to 15 years older than she actually was, and she developed more of a motherly figure. She purposely wanted to make herself seem older so that people would trust her more. If people just saw her as this sweet little old grandma that was caring and would make you food and, offer you a place to stay, she knew that this would be a better way to manipulate people. So in 1981, Dorothea began renting an apartment in downtown Sacramento at 1426 F Street. During this time, she ended up meeting 61-year-old Ruth Monroe. She actually met her through a mutual friend who was dating Ruth at the time. Ruth and Dorothea began a friendship, and one day Dorothea decided she wanted to open up a restaurant. Ruth had a little bit of money, so she told Dorothea, "Listen, I'll give you the money, you can open up this cute little cafe, and we can actually become catering partners and work on this together." So Dorothea accepted the money and they started this business together, but Dorothea would constantly be telling Ruth, "Oh, you know what, the business isn't doing that well, I need more money." So she would constantly be taking money away from Ruth and said it was for the business, which we don't really know if that's true or not. So Ruth ended up getting married to the mutual friend that introduced Ruth and Dorothea in the first place, and unfortunately he was diagnosed with cancer and fell very ill. This was absolutely devastating to Ruth because she loved this man, and it was very hard for her to go through this, and she just didn't want to be alone. So Dorothea wanted to help her and told her, "Listen, you can come stay at my house, I'll take care of you, and this way you won't have to be alone." So on Easter Sunday in 1982, Ruth moved into Dorothea's house. Her son Bill would visit her every single day on his way back from work. He says at first everything seemed completely normal. He trusted Dorothea and he knew that she would take care of his mom. At one point, Dorothea told Bill and his siblings that they could call her grandma, and that's pretty much how they saw her. They just saw her as a sweet, innocent old lady that was taking care of their mom. So things started out fine, but after a few days, Ruth started to get sick and become very weak. One day, Bill went to go visit his mom, and he noticed that Ruth had a drink in her hand, which he thought was very weird because his mother didn't drink alcohol. She didn't like the taste of alcohol, and it actually made her very sick. So he asked his mom about this. He's like, "Oh, why are you drinking?" And Ruth told him, "Oh, this is just a drink that Dorothea made me to help calm my nerves." So then Bill didn't question it. He trusted Dorothea, and he trusted that she was doing the best that she could to take care of his mom. However, over the next few days, Ruth started to get very, very sick. The last time that Bill saw her, she was just laying in her bed facing up. She wasn't talking, she wasn't moving. I mean, she was just laying there, and Bill would tell her, listen, you're gonna be okay. Dorothea's taking care of you. You're in good hands. And he says that his mom didn't reply to him. She just had a blank stare and had a tear rolling down her cheek. The next morning, his brother called him and told him Mom died. So Bill immediately went over to Dorothea's house to see what happened, and she tells him that his mother had taken her own life. This completely shocked Bill and the rest of the family. They didn't understand why their mom would do this. I mean, she seemed happy, she loved life, she had grandkids to live for. It just didn't make sense why she would take her own life, but they trusted Dorothea, and that's just what they had to accept. Ruth had only been living in Dorothea's house for 2 weeks before she died. So then a few weeks go by and police go back to Dorothea's home because a 74-year-old pensioner named Malcolm Mackenzie accused Dorothea of drugging and robbing him. She was convicted on 3 charges of theft on August 18th, 1982, and was sentenced to serve 5 years in jail. While she was serving time, she became pen pals with a man named Everson Gilmuth. For the next 3 years, the two began to fall in love, and Everson actually moved from his home state, Oregon, to California just so he could be closer to Dorothea and prepare for her release. Then in September of 1985, they opened a joint bank account, and when she was released, she moved back into her boarding house with Everson. They began making plans for their wedding in the future, and everything seemed to be going well at the start. But then, just after a few months of living together, Everson disappeared and cut all ties with his family. When his family would call the house to check in on Everson and see where he was, Dorothea would pick up the phone and tell them, oh, Everson's not here right now, he's out, he can't speak to you in the moment, just call back later. Which his family thought was really strange. I mean, it just seemed as if he had just vanished into thin air. While Everson was missing, Dorothea would continue to cash in his pension, and she even began writing letters to his family saying, oh, you know what, Everson is actually sick and I'm taking care of him. However, his family never saw or spoke to him again. 2 months after his disappearance, on New Year's in 1986, a fisherman spotted a box floating in the river near the dump. Inside the box was the body of a man that had been so decomposed they couldn't identify him or his cause of death. Then, for the next 3 years, this person would remain unknown. While Everson is presumed to be missing, Dorothea is still living her life like normal, and she's still accepting new tenants to room in the boarding house. She would mainly accept people that were homeless, that had mental health issues, that were just living off Social Security, and basically just vulnerable people. She would take them in, make food for them, give them a bed, and she said that she basically wanted to help these people. So for 3 years, what Dorothea was doing behind closed doors went completely undetected. Tenants at the boarding house would come and go, and it wasn't until November of 1988 when a social worker named Judy Moyes got involved. She had been helping 51-year-old Alvaro Bert Montoya, who struggled with his mental health and had been homeless for years, find a place to stay. She came across Dorothea's boarding house and was able to secure a bed for Bert to sleep on. Everything seemed to be going well. Dorothea, like I mentioned, appeared to be a sweet old lady who was very comforting, and Bert told Judy that he enjoyed staying with her. So one day, Judy called the house to check in on Bert, and Dorothea told him that he had left for a vacation to Mexico with his family. Now this seemed odd to Judy because she knew that Bert did not get along with his family and that they hadn't spoken in years. So she didn't understand why out of nowhere Bert would randomly start speaking to his family again and then go to Mexico with them without letting her know. So the next time she calls a boarding house, Dorothea tells her, oh, you know what, Bert isn't back yet, but maybe just wait a few days and see if he's back by then. At this point, Judy is getting very frustrated because she just feels in her gut that something isn't right. So she tells Dorothea, listen, if by Monday I call and I still don't hear from Bert, I'm going to the police and I'm reporting him as missing. While she was waiting for Monday to come around, Judy actually went to go speak with another tenant. This man was named John Sharp, and he told Judy that there was something very wrong happening in the house. He also told her that he had seen Dorothea Dorothea digging in the backyard. This is when Judy really began to worry and she decided to call the police and report Bert as missing. She told detectives to bring shovels with them because she had seen mounds of dirt in Dorothea's yard and to her it looked like a burial ground. So on Friday, November 11th, 1988, Detective John Carpenter, his partner Terry, and Dorothea's parole officer Jim all arrived to the boarding house and knock on the front door. Dorothea opens the door and she's dressed very nicely and she looks all proper and nice, and she tells the detectives, "I was expecting you guys." They told her, "Okay, you know why we're here. We need to find out what happened to Bert Montoya." And this is when she looked directly at her parole officer Jim and told him, "I'm breaking my parole. I'm running a boarding house." So all three of them walk inside and they begin looking around the house. They literally searched through every single room, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. This is when Detective John remembered what Judy had told him about the mounds of dirt in her yard, so he goes up to Dorothea and says, "Can I go dig in your yard?" And she tells him, "Listen, why don't we do this instead? How about you go back to the police station because I'm sure you have way better things to do than dig up some holes, and I'll find some people that can come and dig the holes for you." And Detective John is like, "Yeah, no. Like, that's not gonna happen. I'm not leaving. I will personally dig the holes." So Dorothea's like, "All right, if that's what you want." And she leads the detectives to her yard. They had only brought 2 shovels with them, so they actually had to borrow one of Dorothea's shovels, and they began to dig. While Detective John is digging, he finds a hole that has something that appears to be cloth inside. He thought this was pretty strange and seemed out of the ordinary, so he decided to dig a bit further, and when he was 3 feet in, he struck a tree root, or what he thought was a tree root. When he pulled it out, he realized it wasn't a tree root and he was holding a human femur bone. The 3 men were completely shocked. Like, they weren't expecting to find this. They kind of just like stared at the hole and were in shock, and then they turned to look at Dorothea and she was also just as shocked. They said Dorothea was also looking at the hole and that she kind of went, "Oh my God," like she was just shocked and she like covered her face and was like, "Oh my God, like, is that what I think it is?" And the detectives were like, "Yeah, this is a human bone. Like, what's it doing here?" And she was like, "Oh my goodness, I have no idea how that got there. Like, I don't know anything about it." So now that they have found human remains, Detective John decides to conclude the dig so that a proper forensic search can be conducted the next day. Meanwhile, he takes Dorothea back to the police station and begins to question her. Her interrogation is on YouTube if you want to watch it. I'll try and include some clips of it here, but if not, I will link it down below. But at this point during the interrogation, the detectives don't have any concrete evidence against Dorothea, so they don't charge her with anything and they let her go back to the house. The next day, on Saturday, November 12th, detectives and a forensic team go back to Dorothea's house to continue the dig. At this point, the press had heard about what was going on, and a lot of them were standing outside the house taking photos and videos of everything that was happening. While the detectives continued their dig, Dorothea called Detective John into her house and asked him, "Am I under arrest?" John says no, and she says, "Okay, perfect. Can I go get a cup of coffee around the corner at a hotel where my nephew works?" I'm not sure why John told her this was fine because they literally had found human remains on her property. So Dorothea comes walking out her front door with this red coat on, and as her and John are leaving, a photographer takes this photo of them and then they start heading towards the hotel. Detective John waits there until Dorothea walks inside the hotel and then he heads back to her house to continue the dig. While he's digging, he hits something else, and when he uncovers it, he sees that it's a human leg. Then they continue to dig, and in total they uncovered 7 bodies. When they find this, everyone immediately begins to ask, "Where's Dorothea?" And this is when John is kind of like, "Crap, I literally let her leave and go get coffee." So the detectives head over to the hotel, but when they walk inside, Dorothea is nowhere to be found. They ask one of the employees if they saw Dorothea come in, and they said yes, that Dorothea had come inside the lobby and headed straight to the payphones. Then she called a taxi and she just took off. So the detectives decide to get the FBI involved, and that's when a manhunt for Dorothea Puente begins. So Dorothea ended up fleeing to Los Angeles, California, and she was staying at the Royal Viking Hotel. She had been hiding in her room for a couple of days, but one night she decided to get all dressed up and go out to a bar. At this bar, she met a man named Charles Wilgrave, and she introduced herself as Dorothea Johansson, using the last name of one of her ex-husbands. Charles and Dorothea began talking, and they quickly made a connection. They even began talking about the idea of Dorothea potentially moving in with Charles. Like, I have no idea how she did this. I don't know how she was able to just make people believe she was this amazing person and convince them to just like do things with her so quickly. I honestly think she was a master manipulator and could really create any narrative she wanted to. So while Dorothea was in Los Angeles hiding from the police had put out a report stating that pensioners should be careful with a woman named Dorothea Puente and that she was wanted in connection with multiple murders and social security fraud. Well, the next day, Charles is sitting at home watching TV, and all of a sudden a report on Dorothea Puente appears on the screen. This is when he makes a connection and realizes that the Dorothea that he's been talking to is the same Dorothea that's wanted by the police. So he picks up the phone and turns in Dorothea. Police showed up to the Royal Viking Hotel and arrested Dorothea just 3 days after she had fled. She was taken into custody and transported back to Sacramento, where she was held without bail. As police were arresting her, she told them, "I used to be a very good person." So going back to the 7 bodies found on Dorothea's property, thankfully a forensic team was able to identify all 7 bodies. The first body they found was 78-year-old Leona Carpenter. She was a sick widow who technically died from a drug overdose while living in Dorothea's house. However, people that knew Leona knew she was so sick that there was absolutely no way she could have walked across the room on her own to get the drugs that took her life. They knew that Dorothea had drugged her and killed her. Next, police found 64-year-old Dorothy Miller. She was an Army veteran that was last seen alive in October of 1987. After she vanished, Dorothea used her veteran ID to get medical treatment. Then, police found 78-year-old Betty Palmer, who was last seen in August of 1986. When police found her, she was missing her hands, head, and lower limbs. She had been buried in the front yard right next to the sidewalk. 55-year-old Benjamin Fink was the next person to be found. He was last seen in April of 1988 after Dorothea told another tenant that she was going to take Benjamin upstairs and make him feel better. After that, he was never seen again. Next, police found 62-year-old James Gallup, who had suffered severe health issues before he moved into the boarding house. Then, 64-year-old Vera Fay Martin was discovered, who was last seen in 1987. Some investigators believe that she may have been buried alive because the patterns in the dirt around her body indicated that she may have been attempting to claw her way out of the grave, which is just so heartbreaking and just so cruel. Like, imagine being buried alive, trying to fight your way out and save yourself. It's just absolutely horrible. Lastly, police found 51-year-old Alvaro Bert Montoya buried on the side of the house. 7 people were buried on this property and no one knew. None of the neighbors knew that any of this was going on, and everyone was just completely shocked. They couldn't understand how this frail old woman had killed 7 people, buried them in her property, and had gotten away with it for so long. It honestly breaks my heart because these were vulnerable people that were just trying to find a place to stay at, and they trusted Dorothea. They trusted her to take care of them, and she just used them. She just wanted their money and wanted to cash in their social security checks. I'm just so happy that Judy spoke up and she followed her gut. She knew that something was wrong and that Bert was in trouble. She was the one that actually called Bert's family to let them know that he had passed away, and his mother was actually still alive. She was 93 years old and she hadn't seen or heard from Bert in years. So when they found out that he had passed away and was murdered, they were all completely shocked and just couldn't believe it, but they were happy that his body was found and that they could properly lay him to rest. They held a memorial for Bert, and it was just really heartbreaking for everybody involved. And Judy actually did an interview, and she said that in a way she feels like Bert's purpose was to expose Dorothea and finally get her caught. So remember how I mentioned that 3 years before Dorothea was caught, an unidentified body had been found in a makeshift coffin in the river? Well, they were finally able to identify this body, and it turned out to be Everson Gilmuth, Dorothea's ex-boyfriend. Police believe Dorothea is also responsible for Everson's death, so now there's 8 people tied to Dorothea. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy on the bodies, and they found traces of Galman, also known as flurazepam, which is a strong drug that is commonly used to treat anxiety or insomnia. When police were inspecting Dorothea's house earlier in the investigation, they had found a lot of bottles of prescription for flurazepam, as well as other prescriptions that could have potentially been used on her victims. This also showed police that this is probably how Dorothea was able to get the upper hand on her victims. But now they knew that she was drugging them, and that's how she would overpower them at the start, but they still couldn't figure out how she had dragged and buried their bodies alone. Now, when all of this information came to light, police began to wonder if maybe Dorothea was also responsible for the death of her friend Ruth Monroe. Dorothea had told Ruth's family that she had taken her own life, but now police believe that she also drugged and killed Ruth and stole her money. When I think back to what her son Bill was saying about how the last time he went to visit her, she was very sick and just seemed very unhealthy, and that he was telling her, "Don't worry, Mom, Dorothea taking care of you, like you'll be fine," and that a tear was rolling down her face. And it makes me wonder if she already knew that Dorothea was the one making her sick. Records show that she had cashed over 60 Social Security checks after her tenants were deceased. Now, some people believe that maybe Dorothea had an accomplice. Like I mentioned, police don't really understand how she was able to drag these bodies and bury them by herself. So some people theorize that maybe she had one of the other tenants help her. Like maybe one of the tenants was like, you know what, I'm just gonna help her bury these bodies because I would rather help her than be killed. Again, we don't know if she actually did have an accomplice, but it's definitely just interesting to think about how she was able to do all of this on her own. So then in June of 1990, after her pre-trial hearing, the judge decided that Dorothea should stand trial on 9 counts of murder. Her trial began towards the end of 1992, and for a brief moment, the jury was in a deadlock. There was one juror that was saying no, that he didn't believe Dorothea was a killer, so it kept them in a deadlock, and the judge was like, listen, you guys need to go back into that room and come to a solution. So on August 26, 1993, the jury found Dorothea Puente guilty for the murder of Leona Carpenter, Dorothy Miller, and Benjamin Fink, which are only 3 out of the 9 victims. The jury just couldn't reach a decision on the 6 remaining victims, so the judge decided to declare a mistrial on those charges. When Bill heard that Dorothea was not going to be charged for the murder of his mother, Ruth, he was completely heartbroken, and he says he felt sick to his stomach. I actually cried watching his interview when he's talking about this because it's just messed up. He said that the lawyer told him, well, it's not like she'll get more time in prison because she's already serving a life sentence, so there's nothing you can do. In the end, 64-year-old Dorothea Puente was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She still maintained her innocence and said she did not kill anybody. While she was in prison, she released a recipe book called Cooking with a Serial Killer, which is like so random and like so weird, but she came out with 50 recipes. Then on March 27, 2011, 82-year-old Dorothea Puente passed away in prison. And that was it. She was just gone, and any answers that the family still needed from her or police still needed from her just vanished with her. We might never know if she did have more victims or if she did have an accomplice or, anything else about the case. So her house ended up going for sale on the market in 2002, and Barbara Holmes and her husband Tom Williams eventually bought the home. They actually allow people to tour the home for $10 to $15, and all of the proceeds they get from these tours go to the Francis House Center, which is an organization that helps to provide people with basic needs. There's videos on YouTube that you can watch where they give a tour inside the home, and honestly watching it is pretty eerie. Like, it's really strange. Like, it's really sad to know that all of these people passed away in this home. You know, now you can just like go tour it if you want and take photos. At one point, the couple's master bedroom was actually the room where Dorothea would kill her victims.
This was where her first body was buried, underneath this fountain here. It was distinctive because it had no head, hands, or feet.
This is the room Puente stored her victims' bodies before burying them. It is now the master bedroom.
Right now it's our room, but originally she used this area to lay out the bodies.
The Williamses say they couldn't pass up the 5-bedroom duplex's price tag of $215,000, a bargain basement discount due to the house's notorious history.
The price was killer.
They really try to embrace the home's criminal past.
We do like to have some fun here. This is the shower curtain that we chose for our bathroom.
They have memorabilia around the home and even a life-size statue of the serial killer by the front door.
This is Dorothea Puente. It's to make light of everything so that people look at it and they see funny, they don't see dead bodies.
I don't know. I just find it like interesting because I could never imagine like being in that room or sleeping in that room. The new owners have kind of tried to play around with the house a bit. They have a sign in the yard that says trespassers will be drugged and buried in the yard. They also have a mannequin of Dorothea outside the front door and in the backyard holding a shovel. I don't know if I would ever go visit there. I just think it's important to remember that, you know, real people died there. There's real victims that suffered in this house. What occurred in that house is just very heartbreaking and just truly evil. Dorothea wanted to prey on vulnerable people that were homeless, that had mental health issues, that were, you know, going through a rough time, that she thought no one would notice if they went missing. She thought no one would care if they went missing, no one would come looking for them, but she was wrong. People did care about them and their lives mattered. And that's pretty much it, you guys. That is the case of Dorothea Puente. Let me know your thoughts on this case, and if you guys had heard about her before, I would definitely love to hear what you guys think. Alright, you guys, I think that's pretty much it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for being here and watching and listening to today's case. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, por favor, and hit the subscribe button down below so you guys can join the familia. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys!